guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to day 6 in palette week, where every single day for 7 straight days I am posting some sort of palette themed content. And I'm really excited today because I'm going to be chatting through all of the eyeshadow palettes that I have no pan left behind it or completed no pan left behind style this year. And I'm going to be telling you whether or not I think that they are worth keeping in my collection. I will note that any eyeshadow palette that came into my collection this year, that I purchased this year, that I've tested for the first time this year, that is complete no pan left behind style, I am saving for tomorrow's ranking video where I'll be ranking the last, I believe it's 11 palettes that I've tried. So I have 16 eyeshadow palettes that were not new to my collection entering this year that I have completed no pan left behind style, meaning that I've used every single pan in that palette at least one time. And I have some thoughts. I have 4 eyeshadow palettes that I am for sure, no, sorry, 5 that I am for sure ready to part ways with. So through doing this, I've already figured out that over 25% of these palettes, or at least the ones that I've tried thus far, I don't really see serving a purpose in my collection any longer. And next eyeshadow palette declutter, you will see these leaving my collection. So we're gonna get into it all today. If you're excited, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. All right, you guys, I am like fiddling around with my lighting since moving. Like, I don't want to move. I have such limited space in my apartment. I'm really happy with like where I'm currently set up, but it does not make for like an easy lighting situation. So if I'm looking like very yellow in this video, that's kind of what it seems to be coming across as. I'll try and fix it, but I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm gonna leave you guys on your toes till the very end. We can chat through all the palettes that like I've decided I no longer need. We can get some easy ones out of the way. So we can start with my 3 Rowan quads, which if you guys are not new to this channel, you know how much I love the Rowan quads. So I have the 75 degrees quad, which I'm currently working on in my rolling project 10 pan. This is the oldest in my collection and probably my least favorite. There's just something about this color story I do not like as much as my other 2 quads. And it could be because I like more of a cool toned eyeshadow, whereas this is more warmed toned, but I do still really enjoy this eyeshadow palette. It's 4 cream shadows, not gonna be for everyone. Definitely gives more of that kind of like editorial grungy sort of cream shadow vibe where you get like a little bit of creasing, but it looks really beautiful. So we have Rowan 75 degrees. Then we have Rowan Mood Forever, which I believe is actually my most used quad of my Rowan's quads this year. This is so beautiful. I love every single shade with the exception of this shade I really could do without. It's just a little bit lackluster in my opinion. But I really do like the pink, the red, and then this really beautiful kind of like satin champagne-y sort of shade that has this really beautiful blue sparkle running throughout it. I think it's so stunning. So that one I've been really enjoying. And then I have the Rowan 1111 quad, which is like an OG favorite. I've been really loving this one. My daughter ruined my first 1111 and I instantly went on and repurchased this because I wanted to have it back in my collection. So I knew that these weren't going anywhere, but they were also really easy to just complete these and have these as completed for the year. So these will all be staying. All right, then I have 3 of my Natasha Denona minis. I actually thought I had 4. Did I finish Starlight? Is it Starlight? All right, maybe I haven't finished that one yet. We all know that the Natasha Denona Mini Nude is going nowhere. This is another eyeshadow palette that I have repurchased because my other one I had used so much. It was cracked, it was broken, it was needing replacement. I absolutely love this 5 pan. Yes, you have 5 shades and you're gonna get pretty similar looks. Like, it's not like you have a ton of variety with this eyeshadow palette, but I love the shade Sienna. I feel like it just adds a little bit something special to a neutral eyeshadow because it has a bit of like a green gold sort of flip to it, and I really enjoy that one. Then I have my Natasha Denona Mini Pastel eyeshadow palette, and I will be keeping this one as well. This is definitely more of a companion palette to me, but because it is just a little mini 5 pan, it's really easy to use as a companion palette. And I really like to mix this with both like pastels as well as I can do like a neutral base and then pop on one of these shadows. Like if I wanted to do a cool tone look with like the Natasha Denona Glam, like a cool cool toned base or like a neutral base, and then pop this really beautiful pink shade all over. I love that look. I also love doing more of like a warm toned look, perhaps with the Natasha Denona Biba palette, and then popping this shade right here, which is kind of like a green with a gold flip. Really fun companion palette. I am glad that I know Pan Left Behind did this. Not a favorite in my collection, but definitely one that I feel like still serves a purpose. Hopefully, if I still have looks with these palettes saved on my phone, I'm sharing them with you guys right over to the side. Okay, this is one that I'm still undecided about. I feel like I personally don't feel like I need the mini Biba in my collection, but every time, oops, a shade fell out. Every time I wear this palette, I get some sort of compliment on it, so I'm like struggling to get myself to declutter this one, but also just feel like I don't need this one anymore. So we'll see what happens on declutter day with this one. I just feel like this ends up pulling more of like a warm pink rather than like a neutral or a warm brown. Even when I just reach for these two, like even if I'm not reaching for this more peachy shade, there's just something about this palette that I just personally get really frustrated with as I'm working with it. And so for me, I don't know that I need this anymore, especially because I do have Mini Nude, which I feel like if I'm reaching for a mini palette, like I'm gonna reach for Mini Nude every time. So like, do I really need to keep this one around? Probably not, probably not. But again, my heart isn't like made up for sure on this one. I am so happy that I completed the Persona Identity 1 palette, No Pan Left Behind this year. I do have a shade that is missing. I like took this shade out. It's not magnetic and it ended up cracking and crumbling. So we're missing the really deep dark brown, which is kind of a bummer, but I absolutely love this palette. It has been an all-time favorite in my collection for so long, but also a very neglected palette because I feel like I do that thing with this eyeshadow palette where I feel like I have to reserve it for special occasions. I was just reminded at how much I love this eyeshadow palette, especially I like that this one really does, for the most part, I reach for this for more cool leaning looks. I love all of the shimmers in here. I think they are stunning. They are so smooth on the eyes, and this palette is really, really old in my collection, but I still think it performs beautifully. So this one is definitely staying, and I'm very glad that I pulled this one into this project so early on in this year. All right, then we have my Aether Beauty Amartine Quad. This was another really easy one to just try and knock out right away this year. And I was kind of curious as to whether or not I would want to keep this in my collection. I feel like sometimes with quads, it's easier to feel like I can part ways with it. But I was just reminded at how much I love the look that I get when I use this eyeshadow palette. Yes, it's 4 shades and I really do get like the same look every time that I reach into this palette. But this is such an easy reach for such a really beautiful mauve toned, like dusty purple look. Definitely a go-to if I'm looking for a cool toned purple look. And so I will be keeping this one. I was really excited to be reminded as to why I like this one so much. Then I have my Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow palette, and I will be honest, with my Natasha Denona midis, even if I don't love the palette, I likely won't declutter it. I do like to rearrange my Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes to create my own custom midis, but using this No Pan Left Behind style this year, I actually really enjoyed this even more than I liked it last year when I was testing it for the first time. I feel like when I used this last year, I was really underwhelmed with some of the looks that I created. And I will say that I don't think you're gonna get the most punchy look on the eyes using this eyeshadow palette, but for just an everyday neutral, even matte, like even if I just want to reach into this for the mattes, it's such an easy reach. Quality is really, really good. But the shimmers are still really beautiful. Yes, there's some shimmers in this palette that I like think are a bit boring. Like I really don't reach for a gold. So this shade right here is not going to be a most used shade for me. Same with this one right here. And shockingly, these are both center eyelid shades. But I also really like this inner corner shade, as well as some of the other shades throughout this eyeshadow palette. And I'm really glad this got pulled in. I remember when this was randomly selected to be pulled into the project, I wasn't really excited to reach for this just because I remember being a little bit bored with this eyeshadow palette as I was testing it last year. But I really enjoyed some of the looks that I created with this, and also pairing this with some of my like more intense single shadows I really enjoyed. I feel like I gained more of an appreciation for this palette through this project this year, and so I'm happy that got pulled. All right, then we have my Odin's Norns eyeshadow palette, and I feel like this eyeshadow palette is one that I always think of being as on the chopping block. I also feel like with my Odin's palettes, it might be something where if I declutter, I still like keep the palette in like my makeup library, if you will, just because I feel like I've purchased so many Odin's Eye palettes. I almost feel like I collect them at this point in time. I will say this is not my favorite color story. I feel like I look into this and I'm quite confused for the most part. Also, for the most part, this serves as more of a companion palette to me than it does creating full looks with the palette. That's another reason I really like the No Pan Left Behind project. It's really forced me to think of my eyeshadow palettes in terms of just like one eyeshadow palette. I want to create a look using just the one eyeshadow palette. Whereas in the past, I would have 8 eyeshadow palettes open on my desk at any given time, reaching for like one shade out of each palette. So I feel like I never really like actually appreciated a palette just as a whole and as one color story. So that is one thing that I've really taken away from this project that I've really enjoyed. And I've learned that this is definitely more of a companion eyeshadow palette for me. And there's definitely shades that I love in this palette and shades that I really could do without. So I really like Pink Chameleon. It's a really beautiful, like iridescent sort of inner corner highlight is how I like to use it the most. It's kind of like a white to a pink flip. I think it's beautiful. I like the shade Amber Place up here. It's a really beautiful kind of champagne gold. It's like, it's almost like a marbled gold and silver shade, and it's really stunning on the eyes. However, my palette is getting old and I feel like the quality in this one is starting to decline. The shade Optimism is really beautiful as well. It's kind of like this blue silver sort of shade, but definitely like when I reach into this palette for this shade, it's usually like I'm going in with maybe the Persona or the Natasha Denona Glam, and then I would just be reaching in for the shade Optimism. I did create a look that I absolutely loved using the shade Charming down here. This is probably my favorite shade in this palette, this really beautiful funky blue sort of shade. I think it's so beautiful. But then there are some shades in this palette that I just don't really care for. Most of the mattes I really could do without. Like, I don't feel like the matte quality in this eyeshadow palette is all that great. I don't really care for the shade Obsessed, Passion, Colorful Black. Like, there's some shades in here that I'm like, I really could do without. Because I really love this shade so much, as well as a couple of the other ones I named, I will be keeping this. Also, I do kind of want to keep my Odin's Eye palettes. Through using this, I learned though that I really think that this likely is not gonna be a color story for everybody. Like, I just feel like it's kind of a discombobulated color story. And if I could just own like this shade and this shade as singles, like that would be ideal. But still, I'm gonna keep this palette. And then I also completed my Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction eyeshadow palette, which I absolutely loved. I knew I loved this palette. Last year, I said it had quickly become my favorite Pat McGrath palette in my collection. Although I will say, this and Bronze Seduction, like I go back and forth with. I feel like I've really been loving Bronze Seduction lately because I've really been loving green eyeshadow. But then I really loved this palette for this blue brown shade. Now, I do not think this eyeshadow palette is worth it if you are purchasing it at full price. I would say you would have to get this palette for at least 30% off for me to say it's worth it. I like this one because I feel like it's more like an approachable neutral palette. I really, really like the special shades in this eyeshadow palette. Pat McGrath mattes are just not my favorite. I think there's better mattes on the market. If this was sold like strictly as a quad like this, I would definitely like just be fine with this quad and like wouldn't necessarily need these shades. Now, granted, I do like all of the non-matte shades in this palette, but that's kind of like how I feel about this palette. If this was just a quad, I'd be very happy with just that alone. Nevertheless, this is staying in the collection. I still do really enjoy this palette, and it's still one of my favorites from Pat McGrath. All right, that brings me to the 5 eyeshadow palettes that I no longer feel are worth a spot in my makeup collection. So up first, I have another Aether Beauty quad. This one is the Rose Quartz quad. It is a really beautiful pink quad. I just prefer the Amartine quad, and I just am kind of bored with this. I'm never super excited about a look that I create with this, as opposed to I really like the dusty purple look that I create with the Amartine quad. So I no longer need this. I no longer have space in my collection for anything that I'm not like super excited to reach for. So that's really what I'm trying to think about when I'm reaching into these eyeshadow palettes. I have the Pat McGrath Voyeuristic Vixen quad. This is beautiful, it is, but I like just don't care. These are not the tones that I really care to reach for. And this shade is beautiful, this like pink to gold flip, but it also doesn't last the longest on the eyes. And I just as are many people. I'm just so over like I'm over the rosy tones. So I just don't need that anymore. I'd much rather reach for an indie eyeshadow palette or a single shadow in my collection. So I'm ready to declutter that. I have 2 ColourPop palettes that I am ready to part ways with. So I have the ColourPop, the Child eyeshadow palette. I love green eyeshadow, but I will say, and I don't know if it's because this palette is getting older in my collection, I just think the shimmer shades are just lacking. They just feel lackluster. They don't feel exciting on the eyes. It could be because I've tried so much indie now and I just have a different expectation. Also, if you're not someone who likes a super punchy metallic on the eye, you might feel completely different, but I just am not excited. Each of the looks that I created with the ColourPop palette, I went in with Cleota shadows to like liven up the look. And I thought about potentially I do really like the shade Float Your Crib. I think it's a really beautiful, deeper green shade. So I might take that out and keep that shade. But aside from that, I don't need this anymore. And I'm really I'm happy to let things go because I love to test and try new eyeshadow palettes, but I also constantly feel overwhelmed by how many choices I have from eyeshadow each morning. So it like feels good to just be ready to like pass these things on to others. And then I pulled the Tinkerbell palette back out. This wasn't even going in my No Pan Left Behind, but I was like, you know what, it's March, I want to reach into these green shades, see what I think. And I just, again, was not that impressed. I think this is a really fun Kelly green shade, but I likely could find that in indie if I really put effort to it. I thought the shade Tink would be a unique shade, but it's, again, just lacking. Like, it just feels lackluster on the eyes, and I don't have time for that. So I'm ready to say goodbye to Tinkerbell as well. And then the final eyeshadow palette I have is the Scooby-Doo Rut-Row Reggae palette. And this one is painful because I loved Scooby-Doo as a child. Like the IP really does speak to my youth and my childhood, and I wanted to love this so bad. And I will say I do like the 6 green shades in this eyeshadow palette, but I just cannot with this quad of shades. I will say I do find, like, honestly, like, I'm thinking about potentially, but maybe not, it just depends. Like, I don't even know if these would like repress how I would want. I really do love this shade. I think this shade is pretty unique in my collection. So maybe I would try repressing like just that, like, okay, yeah, I feel like I need to keep that shade. Like, we need to probably repress that shade. But aside from that, I do have shades similar to these 2 in my collection. I have tried to see if I have a dupe of this shade in my collection. I really don't. These 2 I can get close enough. I do think these matte shades are good. I just was really unimpressed with the quality in that quad, and I felt the same way when I completed this eyeshadow palette last year. So I'm just kind of ready to be done with the Scooby-Doo Rut-Row Reggae palette. Like, I'm ready to move on and I'm ready to say goodbye. So those are, aside from all of the new eyeshadow palettes that I brought in, which again, I have a video coming tomorrow. Last day of palette week is going to be ranking the last 11 palettes I tried, that I will chat through all of the other brand new eyeshadow palettes to my collection that I've also completed No Pan Left Behind style. But those are my thoughts on whether or not I think that these eyeshadow palettes still are worth a spot in my eyeshadow palette collection. I would love to know if you have any thoughts or feelings on any of the palettes that I shared today. Are you doing a No Pan Left Behind? What are your thoughts? Have you found palettes in your collection you no longer love, or have you found palettes in your collection that are new favorites through doing this? Would love to know in the comments below, but that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Bye.